Welcome friends. Welcome to the session of Literary Criticism. Today we'll be doing explication of modern fiction, part 1. Though Virginia Woolf did not propound a theory of her own about writing a novel, she expressed the need to try out ways in which the conventional strategies of writing the novel could be replaced by innovative methods. This would suit the changing patterns of human interaction in the modern age. The modern English novel was influenced by writers of Russia and America. Cinema, music, painting, sculpture, and other art forms seem to have penetrated into the art of novel writing. Moreover, the shift from depicting the ordinary, trivial or commonplace events and characters and exposing the intricacies of the human mind ushered the need for experimenting with new techniques of writing the novel. The exploration of a variety of themes with respect to the changing conditions in the society saw the growth of characters being depicted from the complexities of inner consciousness. The external superficialities were ignored, and the characters were analyzed on the basis of the working of the mind in response to the situations happening outside. We come to modern fiction, the essay, and we come to the introduction. Modern fiction is the 12th essay in Virginia Woolf's The Common Reader, the first series. It is considered to be one of the best essays to provide a serious analysis of English fiction in the early 20th century. Woolf brings in a number of novelists and using the method of comparison and contrast, shifting from the past to the present, bringing in writers from England and Russia, she traces the course of modern fiction in England and its influence on the subsequent writers with elan. The essay received acclaim for the introduction of stream of consciousness technique, for which she received recognition much later. We come to the modern English novel. Woolf begins the essay by pointing out that an assessment of the scenario of the English novel of the age would reveal that Fielding and Jane Austen are considered to be easier novelists than novelists of the 20th century. This is because of the easiness of their task of writing a novel. However, such a judgment cannot be considered genuine because it is often colored and marred by prejudices. It is the task of the future historians of literature to predict whether most of the writers are placed in the path of ushering a great period of prose fiction, or whether some writers would be more successful than the rest. The division into materialist and spiritualist. Woolf analyzes English fiction of her age and divides the novelists into two categories, namely the materialists and the spiritualists. H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett, and John Galsworthy belong to the first category. Their work is exemplary and a living reality. They have many merits, but there is a lacuna in the execution of the skills, and this means that they could have made improvisations in their art. Therefore, the appreciation of these novelists is mingled with the feeling of dissatisfaction. Woolf argues that the primary reason for discontentment with these writers is that they constantly engage with the body of the work and not with the spirit. H.G. Wells deserves acclaim for his valuable contribution. His inspiration is pure, but the readers get the feeling that the purity of his inspiration is polluted by a small amount of dirt. He is a materialist in the sense that he takes too much delight in bringing out the framework of the society and its manners. Wells' mind is too generous because he spends much time in making things appear substantial and perfect. He is a materialist because he takes up responsibilities that should have been discharged by government officials given the abundance of his ideas and facts. He scarcely reserves the time to realize the crudity and coarseness of his characters, which are considered inferior, and this tarnishes whatever institutions and ideals provided for them by their creator. Bennett is the best workman of the three novelists, and his novels are flawlessly constructed. His characters are genuine human beings who live abundantly, even unexpectedly. However, their lives are restricted entirely to the physical plane. They certainly enjoy an eternity of bliss, but the enjoyment is the trivial bliss of life lived in a comfortable hotel. They live, but the perception of such a life cannot be accepted. Something is lacking in his novels, and Woolf recognizes the missing element to be life, soul, or spirit. She says, I quote, "Life escapes him, and without life, nothing else is worthwhile." Unquote. The materialists were more concerned about depicting the body rather than the spirit or soul of life. John Galsworthy possesses integrity and humanity, but the manifestation of life is not found in his pages. Of the three novelists, Arnold Bennett is the worst offender. We come to the drawbacks of the materialist. These three novelists are materialists because they give prominence to unimportant things. They spent immense skill and industry making the trivial and the transitory appear to be true and enduring. Life escapes them, and this is true not only of these writers but also of the entire school of fiction, which is the trend or which is dominant in the present age. The novelists who belong to this dominant school are traditionalists. They suffer from the tyranny of custom, convention, or tradition, and their novels are laboriously written with a well-knit plot, characterization, and with love interest in its proper measure. Their plays could easily be classified into tragedies and comedies, but their well-made novels fail to capture life, the spirit, or the soul. The novelists disappoint the reader, and the question that could be raised is life like this? For which the answer is that life is certainly not like the way the traditionalists have expressed it in their fiction. Next, we come to Woolf's conception of the novel. Woolf expresses her disapproval of the traditional English novel and arrives at her conception of the novel and the way in which life or the soul could be rendered by the novelist. She expresses the view that on an ordinary day, an ordinary mind receives myriads of impressions from all directions. Some of these impressions are temporary, others trivial, while many are fleeting. Most of these thoughts are retained by the mind as if they were engraved there by a sharp piece of steel. The imprints that are impinged on the human mind every day constitute the inner life or the soul or the spirit, and it is the duty of the novelist to render such impressions with due emphasis provided they are proper and judicious. The novelist must write according to his perception of life, and not according to the conventions or formulae of the well-constructed 19th century novel, with the various events neatly and logically arranged. The symmetrical and logical arrangement of the events is the denial of life. For in life, artificial and unnatural arrangement of occurrences is not found, and the nature of life is entirely different. Using figurative language, Woolf mentions the widely quoted passage, I quote, "Life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Life is a luminous halo, a semi-transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end. It is not the task of the novelist to convey this varying and unknown and uncircumscribed spirit, whatever aberration or complexity it may display, with as little mixture of the alien and external as possible. We are not pleading merely for courage or sincerity. We are suggesting that the proper stuff of the fiction is little other than custom would have us believe it." Unquote. Woolf has tried to define life, and her definition is clear. She opines that the proper fiction is one that includes life, which is made up of innumerable impressions and exists like a luminous halo. It should be the concern of the novelist to render this life or soul faithfully without adding anything that is alien or external. Such a rendering of life or soul distinguishes the modern spiritualist from traditional materialists. James Joyce is one such spiritualist. We look into James Joyce as a spiritualist. James Joyce and other young novelists like him try to come closer to the projection of life, and they render it faithfully without any regard for conventions and traditions. They have tried to record the shower of impressions as they fall upon the mind in the order in which they fall, and try to trace the pattern that is engraved on human consciousness. Such novelists do not believe that life exists more fully in what is commonly thought big than in what is commonly thought small. Woolf mentions, I quote, "Mr. Joyce is a spiritualist. He is concerned at all cost to reveal the flickerings of that innermost flame which flashes its messages through the brain, and in order to preserve it, he disregards with complete courage whatever seems to be his external or alien, whether it be probability or coherence or any of these signposts which for generation have served to support the imagination of a reader when called upon to imagine what he can neither touch nor see." Unquote. Woolf disapproves of the use of signposts, but it is observed that she provides sufficient signposts in her novels. She writes with an eye on time and place, and in this way imparts unity and coherence to what is in a disordered state. Woolf praises the scene in the cemetery from James Joyce. She explains that the scene is a brilliant exposition of life as it is incoherent, with its significance felt because it is as unpredictable and quick as the thoughts that come to the mind. At a single glance, the scene could be reckoned as a masterpiece because life is seen and can be felt. This well-written scene exposes the fact that life itself is a little disappointing. Woolf provides reasons for the disappointment. First, it disappoints because of the inability of the writer's mind to express the scene properly. Second, the method used by the novelist limits and curtails the creative power. Indecency is emphasized, and preoccupation with indecency is unhealthy and melancholic. Reading Joyce, therefore, does not provide freshness of the spirit or rejuvenation of thoughts. Rather, the tendency is to become self-centered and pessimistic. However, Joyce's method has the merit of bringing experiences closer to life. Reading Ulysses gives the impression that much of life is excluded or ignored. Masterpieces such as Tristram Shandy and Pendennis present other aspects of life which are considered important. The method used by novelists in these works is different from that of a portrait of the artist as a young man and Ulysses. We will now come to the problems faced by modern English novelists. Woolf examines the problems of the modern novelist. His initial problem is to find ways of being free to narrate what he likes. Though the novelist desires to render the life or soul and do something new and original, he has not yet devised any new techniques for their possible implementation. Therefore, he feels restricted, and at once, therefore, the accent falls a little differently. The emphasis is upon something hitherto ignored, at once a different outline of form which becomes necessary, difficult for us to grasp, incomprehensible to our predecessors. His interests become different, which would shift to the rendering of the dark places of psychology. Next is the importance of Russian novelists. The modern English novelists are interested in the psyche or soul as they emphasize different aspects of life, and often the conclusions they draw are ambiguous. Indeed, the modern novel tends to be inconclusive, like life. In this respect, the modern Russian novelists like Chekhov are well ahead of their British counterparts. Chekhov's works are dominated by the unexpected. and the outcome is a whole new effect that is different from the predictable conclusion. But it is impossible to say whether one is tragic or comic. One cannot ascertain that his short stories are brief and conclusive, vague and inconclusive, or whether they should be called short stories. Modern English owes a lot to the Russian influence, because there is life or the soul in their writings. After reading them, it would be appropriate to say that to write of any fiction saves theirs is a waste of time. To understand the soul or heart, we can do so by a study of contemporary Russian fiction. Every Russian writer would seem to discern the features of a saint. It qualifies such as sympathy for the sufferings of others, love towards mankind, and the endeavor to reach some goal that is respectable of the most challenging demands of the spirit are recognized to be the attributes of saintliness. It is the saintly quality in them which demands rethinking of irreligious triviality that affects the credibility and quality of the famous English novels. The uncertainty of human existence poses several questions to the Russians. Life presents before them a number of questions for which they fail to define definite answers, and this failure fills them with despair. The Russian novel is therefore pessimistic. This despair accounts for the disappointment of the English with the Russian novel. The English are capable of observing aspects of life which the Russians fail to see. The English novelists' recount of a man's heroic struggle against heavy odds frustrates a Russian pessimism. Unconsciously, the English novelists protest against the Russian tendency to despair and gloom. The voice of protest of the English is the voice of a civilization which seems to have infused the instinct to enjoy and fight against odds and life's unanswerable questions rather than to suffer and understand. The English fiction, from Sterne to Meredith, bears witness to natural delight in humor and comedy, the beauty of earth, the activities of intellect and splendor of the body. We now come to the conclusion. Woolf, however, maintains the stand that if comparisons between two entirely different types of fiction should be made, they should be done with the care, and the conclusions drawn could be considered worthy only if they point out to the infinite possibilities that the novel holds. She says that there is no limit to the horizon and that nothing, any method or experiment, even of the wildest, is forbidden. I quote, "The proper stuff of fiction does not exist. Everything is the proper stuff of fiction. Every feeling, every thought, every quality of brain and spirit is drawn upon. No perception comes amiss." Unquote. It is only in this way that the novel can be rejuvenated. We will do a critical evaluation of modern fiction. Virginia Woolf did not formulate a theory about the form and matter of a good novel. Though she has not left behind a specific or systematic theory on the art of writing a novel, she has expressed her views on the novel at several stages of her literary career. Her views are of great interest as she is a critic who has delved into the art of writing a novel from a divergent viewpoint that is both novel and insightful. When Virginia Woolf began her career as a novelist, H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett and Galsworthy were recognized for their eminence in writing novels that were well constructed, delineated characters, definite plot and climax. However, Woolf found these novels disappointing because these writers, categorized to be materialists, were concerned with the body rather than the spirit. They were precise in capturing the superficialities of life while leaving behind the soul. Woolf says that Wells was concerned about social well-being of the characters and the efforts to maintain their status killed the artist in him. She found Arnold Bennett to be an excellent craftsman with perfect description of characters. But these characters failed to provide a vision of life. Galsworthy, an admirable novelist, spends more time on unimportant things as if they were true and permanent. Woolf contends that a successful novelist has the potential to render life or spirit to the novel through the incidents. The conventional writers like Wells, Bennett and Galsworthy never gave free expression to their thoughts because they were writing within a confined framework of forced compulsion of adhering to a particular way by an outside force. They followed convention and hence their writing became artificial and unnatural. They scarified the soul, which is the content in search of perfection in art. James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and Ulysses are different from the novels of materialists. Woolf finds Joyce to be original and one who could render the experience of living. She calls him a spiritualist because he is more concerned with the spirit or the soul rather than artistic perfection. He is unconcerned about characterization, logical arrangement of incidents or coherence of the plot. James Joyce gives equal importance to the unimportant and the trivial as well as the significant because life is a combination of the big and the small interweaving with each other. Woolf maintains that fiction should give life and not be a slave to convention or tradition. Regarding the nature of life and the duty of the novelist, Woolf mentions that the human mind receives several impressions from all sides and they shape themselves into the weeks with moments getting importance or not. Man should not be a slave of time because life is neither fixed nor static. It is in a constant state of flux and it is the duty of the novelist to convey this fluidity with truth and sincerity. Human consciousness is the continuum of sensations and impressions that are trivial, fleeting, and evanescent. The novelist should be able to convey these moments without distorting the reality of life. The writer must not try to put up any signposts for the guidance of his readers, for he should not care for the logical interlinking of the various events, but concentrate his art on rendering of reality. Woolf gives importance of James Joyce because he concentrates on exposing the subconscious and the unconscious mind. He seems to have succeeded in capturing the vagueness and inconclusiveness of life. His novel gives a sense of finality instead of continuity. While writing, I quote, "Nothing, no method, no experiment, even if the wildest, is forbidden, but only falsity and pretense," unquote. For the proper staff of function does not exist. Woolf is dissatisfied with the works of the great masters of the English novel. She accuses them of being materialists without giving importance to the spiritual. She finds the spiritual note in the writings of the Russian novelists who, according to her, possess the features of a saint. Woolf's remarks are shrewd and penetrating. She has used epigrammatic sentences and terseness to emphasize her point of view. Her lines are frequently quoted. The imagery used is visual and sensuous, and it serves to concretize abstract concepts that are difficult to follow. We now come to the summary. Virginia Woolf did not predict a theory of fiction. She discussed about the art of writing a novel that should primarily be true to life. She mentions about the materialists and the spiritualists who view the art of fiction in diverse ways. The materialists are compelled to follow particular ways by a force that could definitely be the 19th century convention of writing, that is artificial and unnatural. They sacrifice the soul of work in search of perfection of art. The spiritualists are associated with the spirit or the soul rather than artistic perfection. They give equal preference to the unimportant and the trivial, because life is a combination of several incidents that differ in gravity, but they interweave with each other. She finds a spiritual note in the writings of the Russian novelists who, according to her, are saintly because they have properly understood how to project life through fiction. With that, we come to the end of the session. Hope this was useful. Until we meet again, it's a goodbye from all of us here.